LeBron James just completely exposed Victor Wembanyama after his recent finals meltdown, and what he said will shock you to the fullest.
Unfortunately, they sent a boy to do a man's job.
But here is where it gets crazy. It's not just LeBron. A whole wave of NBA players and legends are coming out to expose how badly Wemby choked when it mattered most. And it gets even worse when you hear what Kevin Durant and Shaq just leaked about what this disaster is going to do to the rest of his career. LeBron James knew exactly what he was doing when he made that statement about sending a boy to do a man's job, because that was not just a casual viral soundbite for social media. It was LeBron calling out the entire NBA for hyping up a kid who completely panicked the second the championship was on the line. Everyone wanted to crown this guy as the next chosen one. But the moment the Knicks showed him they didn't plan to back down, he completely folded. The tape from the recently concluded series is honestly wild compared to how the media were trying to protect him. Think about how much everyone hyped his regular season, only for him to ghost his team the second Game 1 started at Madison Square Garden. Wemby walked onto that court and shot 6 for 21 from the floor while throwing up bricks on 2 of his 9 three-point attempts. That is under 29% shooting in the biggest series of his life. But you won't believe what came out when the advanced tracking data leaked, because that's just the start. You're about to hear a lot worse. What if I told you that across all 5 games, Wemby made just 12 shots out of 35 total attempts in the fourth quarter? Shooting 34% from the floor when the pressure builds is a huge disaster for a guy like Wemby. And it gets so much worse when you see the individual games that the Spurs absolutely threw away because their superstar forgot how to play basketball. In the final 60 seconds of Game 2, when the Spurs were only down by 2, Wemby fumbled a basic handoff like a confused rookie, gave the ball away, and then committed a lazy transition foul on Brunson that basically ended the game right there. Then we have Game 4, which is easily the most embarrassing choke job we have ever seen in modern sports. The Spurs were leading by 29 points on the road and had the entire New York crowd completely silent. But Wemby completely lost his mind down the stretch, bricked 2 massive free throws when the team needed them most, and allowed the Knicks to pull off an impossible comeback. That single game completely broke the spirit of the entire Spurs roster, leading straight to another execution failure in their season-ending 94-90 loss in Game 5. Every single game in this series was within 5 points in the final minute, meaning Wemby's mental mistakes were a huge part of why they lost a ring. LeBron saw right through the internet hype, so when he said Wemby was a boy trying to do a man's job, he wasn't just talking. But you want to know what's crazy about this whole thing? He was not the only superstar that had something to say. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was prepared for Karl-Anthony Towns to be the one who broke Wemby's soul in this series. The same Karl-Anthony Towns that Charles Barkley has been dragging on national TV for 6 straight years, calling him soft, calling him a non-defender, saying he disappears when it matters. And then Game 1 of the NBA Finals comes, and Towns holds the unanimous Defensive Player of the Year to 2 for 12 shooting from the floor in their direct matchups, which is like 16% shooting from Wemby, who's supposed to be the most unguardable player on earth, and Chuck had absolutely nothing to say about it, because what are you even going to say at that point? But the thing that makes it so much worse for Wemby is that the media completely tried to sweep Towns' performance under the rug, because the narrative they were selling all series was this lone alien genius being let down by his teammates and needing more help around him. But then Dylan Harper goes out in Game 5 as a 20-year-old rookie coming off the bench and drops a team-high 25 points on 10 of 19, shooting with 5 rebounds and 4 assists without a turnover in an elimination game on the road, while his franchise player was going 7 for 19 and bricking the free throws that could have changed the series. But nobody is talking about Harper at all. The post-game shows just cut straight to focusing on Wemby. And then you've got Stephon Castle, who spent the entire playoffs guarding the best guard on every single team. He locked down SGA in the conference finals and held Brunson to 27% shooting in their direct matchups throughout the series, while doing the most thankless job on that roster every single night. And according to report from Knicks insiders and journalists, Karl-Anthony Towns basically said what everyone was thinking. The media hyped him all series, but completely forgot to give props to his teammates that actually saved him from a historic sweep. Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle are teenagers out there fighting through screens, sacrificing their bodies and putting up real numbers. But the TV segments tomorrow are still going to find a way to blame everyone else except the guy who shot 36% from the floor in an elimination game. While Towns was doing all that, Anthony Edwards was watching the same tape from his couch in Minnesota, and he noticed a huge flaw in Wemby's competitive drive that is about to completely change how you view the future face of the league. Anthony Edwards did not even wait for the final buzzer of Game 5 to start texting his friends about how the media-anointed savior of basketball got exposed. While everyone at ESPN was busy crying on live television about Wemby's tragic loss, Ant was reportedly laughing up a storm because he has been telling anyone who would listen that this whole unstoppable alien narrative is a total joke. Here's exactly how the reporters from Minnesota say he put it: "I don't care about no alien nicknames or whatever the networks are calling him on TV. If you're 7'4" and you let 6'7" dudes dictate where you go on the floor, you're soft." You have to realize that Edwards is a different breed of competitor, a guy who actually earned his stripes by going to war in the Western Conference. So watching a 7'4" center get completely bullied by a bunch of 6'7" wings was basically comedy to him. The entire blueprint for breaking Wemby was laid out in the first 5 minutes of Game 1 on June 4th at Madison Square Garden. Mike Brown had OG Anunoby and Josh Hart body Wemby the second he crossed half court, hitting him with aggressive defenses that completely changed his entire approach for the rest of the series. Edwards noticed on the tape that after those initial hits, Wemby completely lost his appetite for attacking the rim. He started bailing out the Knicks defense by settling for heavily contested, early clock triples from 30 feet out, instead of using his height to establish real interior position. It was a complete execution, because his stubbornness to play like a point guard totally stalled the San Antonio half-court offense, forcing Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper into horrific shot clock situations where they had to bail him out. The physical beatdown was bad, but the trap New York set up above the break was pure genius. They switched smaller, stronger perimeter defenders onto Wemby to strip away his operating space, and instead of punishing them, he just kept coughing up the ball. Then the ultimate disaster struck in Game 4 when the Spurs choked away that historic 29-point lead, and Ant pointed out that the meltdown completely fractured the team's internal confidence heading into the elimination game. Wemby was rattled mentally, and it showed in how he carried himself on the court. However, personally, I wonder if Ant is just speaking the unfiltered truth, or if he is secretly terrified that Wemby is stealing all the marketability and attention that should belong to him. But while Ant was dropping these, Jalen Brunson was the one who actually had to stand on the floor and look Wemby right in the eye. And once you hear the exact statement he made, you realize that he wasn't even playing a physical game with Wemby all season. Jalen Brunson stood on a podium in front of the entire city of New York at the championship parade and said this:
"There's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions, but when you prove them wrong, you really don't have to say shit to them."
The crowd absolutely lost their mind, and the reason that line hit so differently is that everyone in that crowd knew exactly who he was talking about. Because this whole series people kept framing it as Brunson surviving Wembanyama's physical dominance, but the actual game tells a completely different story. And here's where it gets really interesting for the people who are actually paying attention. Brunson came into this series already being told by half the NBA media that he wasn't a real number one option, that the Knicks didn't have a superstar. Becky Hammon said that on live television, while Brunson was averaging nearly 27 points a game in the playoffs and had just swept 2 conference opponents back-to-back. Then Game 3 happens at Madison Square Garden, and Wemby shoves Brunson to the ground by the head, gets no call, and then literally turns around and laughs in his face on camera, and the whole world saw it, but Brunson just got up, said nothing, didn't jaw back, didn't throw his hands up at the refs, and then went and won the game so Wemby could celebrate like he'd figured something. But the part that actually matters is what Brunson said about that moment afterward was that he knew the second Wemby pointed at his head and smiled that the Spurs had already lost Game 4, because champions do not celebrate in the third quarter of a game. They haven't won yet, and he was right about every word of that. In Game 4, Wemby spent the first quarter grinning at Mitchell Robinson after goading him into a flagrant foul, while Brunson on the other bench was sitting there running the actual play that ended the game, and by the fourth quarter, the Spurs had turned a 29-point lead into a 1-point loss. Oh, and Brunson scored 36 points, by the way. This exact mental strategy is why Brunson has a ring and Wemby had the biggest lesson of his life.
Compared to anything before, this is the biggest lesson of my life, the biggest learning moment.
And also why one of the most controversial voices in the entire NBA right now had to come out and speak. Draymond Green went on his podcast and gave the entire league the green light to absolutely terrorize this kid next season. But you already know Draymond can never keep a secret to save his life. So he casually let it slip on his podcast that Kevin Durant was behind the scenes saying things that are 10 times meaner than anything LeBron or Anthony Edwards came up with. Think about it, because KD is the one guy in the entire league who actually knows what it feels like to carry the weight of a franchise in the finals while everyone on the internet calls you a fraudulent superstar. And right after that Game 5, KD allegedly hopped right onto his burner accounts and private group chats to tell anyone who would listen that Wemby is not ready for the big boy table yet. He said, and I quote, "He's still a boy who got caught on the biggest stage. That's not a dig. That's just the truth. Come back next year. Show us something different." KD essentially said that while the regular season stat lines look pretty on paper, the finals are a completely different sport where you actually find out who you are when the pressure starts suffocating you. He straight up called Wemby a boy who got caught empty-handed on the biggest stage in the world, and coming from a guy who literally won back-to-back finals MVPs. That is not a good look for Wemby. But here's the part nobody is talking about, because this entire series loss is about to trigger a massive domino effect across the entire league. The older superstars are not just laughing at Wemby on the internet, they are actively taking notes on how easily he folded the second the Knicks threw some basic physical defense at him. Every single team in the Western Conference now has the exact step-by-step blueprint to make Wemby totally miserable. It makes you realize that this one series did not just cost the Spurs a championship ring, it stripped away the entire aura of invincibility that Wemby spent the last 2 years building. But the worst part of this entire situation isn't even what the current players are saying. It's the legends. And these guys, they didn't hold back one bit. Charles Barkley was literally suffocating from laughter on the inside the NBA set because he spent the last 8 months warning every single person on television that raw talent and pure toughness are completely different things in this league. But immediately after the final game, Chuck went into a rant about how Karl Anthony Towns, a guy who Barkley has been publicly calling soft and lazy, completely had Wemby locked down defensively.
Wemby's in shock right now. It's probably been a long time since he got his ass kicked like this.
The most embarrassing part of this whole disaster is that the talk shows keep pretending Wemby just needs more help around him. But Barkley saw right through that nonsense and said that Wemby is simply not an aggressive person by nature, meaning he might show flashes of greatness at times, but he is not that absolute monster who wakes up, walks into the arena, and decides he is going to lay it all and dominate the court by sheer power. You won't believe the data that came out next when the advanced analysts started looking at Wemby's positioning, because it completely validates why Shaquille O'Neal was sitting right next to Chuck and getting heated about how this 7'4" kid is single-handedly ruining the art of playing center. Shaq was practically throwing a tantrum on air because he knows exactly what it feels like to get your spirit broken on the biggest stage after getting swept in his very first finals appearance back in 1995 against Hakeem Olajuwon and the Rockets. But Shaq's ultimate frustration is that the entire world is praising Wemby's guard skills when he is literally the tallest human being on the court and should be destroying the restricted area. The tracking data from the series exposed an unbelievable stat showing that across all 5 games of these finals, Wemby averaged less than 2 traditional low-post touches per game. Shaq also talked about how Wemby needs to get stronger.
About Wemby, as good as he is, he's going to need to get stronger, because when you become a dominant big man, people go to force. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to have a certain mentality, the same mentality that I saw him have, the same mentality that I saw Patrick Ewing have, that Draymond has. He came out with a lot of energy and a lot of effort.
According to Shaq on another episode of Inside the NBA, the real problem that nobody is talking about is whether this public humiliation is actually going to hurt Wemby enough to make him change his entire approach. His exact words were, "I was 22 in my first finals, I got swept, and I went home and I worked." The question for Wemby is, does losing hurt him enough to change? Or does he go back to France and do kung fu and come back the same guy? But while Shaq was looking at this tragedy through the lens of old-school big man toughness, Draymond Green made a statement that is about to make Wemby's life much worse next year. But before we talk about what he said, I must point out the irony here. Because Draymond is like the most suspended, flagrant happy player of this entire generation. A guy who literally got suspended for Game 5 of the 2016 Finals and single-handedly handed LeBron James and Cleveland a championship. So, for Draymond to be the one lecturing anyone about composure and mental fortitude is easily the most ironic thing in recent NBA history. But it is also the most credible warning Wemby could ever receive, because Draymond is the undisputed world champion of letting emotions destroy a season. Draymond explained that when Wemby walked straight off the floor without shaking the Knicks players after losing, he surrendered all the psychological advantage to the winner. He told his audience that if you leave the court without looking your killer in the face after a beating, you are letting that man own your subconscious forever.
Look your killer in the face. Look your killer in the face. You got to look them in their face. By the way, if you leave the court and you don't look me in my face and I just beat you, I actually know that I own you forever because you couldn't even look me in the face.
Draymond openly clowned him by saying that walking off like a little kid proved Jalen Brunson and the city of New York are currently living completely rent-free inside his head. And that gave the entire league a blueprint on how to mentally break him. But if you think that's wild, wait till you hear how Stephen A. Smith completely lost his mind on First Take the very next morning on ESPN. Stephen A. took a different direction and talked about how the NBA had a heavy financial and global interest in keeping Wembanyama competitive in this series. Think about it, because the networks desperately needed this 5-game battle to stretch out as long as possible for the TV ratings. And the officiating showed exactly how much the league office wanted their new golden boy to succeed. Stephen A. stated that if that had been a player like Draymond Green or even any player in the league, he would have been suspended and sent packing by the second round of the playoffs. And he is completely right, because the disciplinary standards were entirely flipped upside down for the alien. The facts on the ground from the postseason run proved that the league was giving Wemby a total pass on violent plays that would get anyone else banned from the building. Earlier in the playoffs, Wemby literally elbowed Minnesota's Naz Reid straight in the jaw, which resulted in a flagrant 2 and the very first ejection of his professional career.
Wembanyama, it meets all the criteria and has been upgraded to a flagrant foul penalty 2.
But instead of calming down, he kept throwing his body around and elbowed Karl Anthony Towns directly in the chin during Game 4 of the Finals to pick up his third flagrant point of the postseason, leaving him exactly 1 point away from an automatic suspension. And that's exactly when the referees completely swallowed their whistles to protect the league's prime investment. The most obvious example happened back in Game 3 when Wemby shoved Jalen Brunson directly in the head and neck area, completely got away with it, and then turned around to laugh right in his face on camera. The NBA later admitted the referees completely missed that call, which is a wild confession that basically validates why the entire sports world is side-eyeing the special treatment Wemby received. But while Stephen A. was basically exposing a whole corporate protection program, the actual technical blueprint to destroy this dude came from Gilbert Arenas. He got on his podcast right after the finals and said, "Look, the system is rigged to protect these overseas hype jobs. You got a guy who is 7'4" trying to play like Kyrie Irving at the top of the key because it looks good in highlight packages. But real players know. He choked because he wanted to look cool on the perimeter instead of using his frame. And honestly, the records back it up completely because of what Gil calls the hip check trick. When you have short, stocky built dudes like Josh Hart or OG Anunoby sliding their body weight right under a 7'4" guy's hips, it completely deletes his power base. He literally becomes a helpless flagpole who can't back down a single person on the block. Then you have the hilarious reality of his high crossover dribble. Because his wingspan is so freakish, when he bounces the ball, it literally rises up to the waist level of a normal-sized human being. So secondary guards are just sitting in the gap waiting to pluck his handle every time he tries to act like a point guard on the perimeter. The tracking data shows he was actively passing the ball away when he had Mitchell Robinson one-on-one deep under the rim instead of just using his height to dunk on his head. And that is already creating some crazy friction inside that San Antonio locker room, because you had role players like Dylan Harper out there fighting through screens and sacrificing their bodies on cheap rookie deals. But the morning talk shows will still find a way to give Victor all the credit while he weakens their entire offensive rebounding by floating around the three-point line and shooting step-backs. The myth of the untouchable alien is officially dead because a championship series is a brutal street fight. And all those viral clips mean absolutely nothing when you look at the raw numbers showing he shot 36% from the floor in a season-ending 94-90 loss in Game 5. The series permanently shattered the narrative that he's immune to traditional defensive pressure. And now, every single team in the West has the exact step-by-step plan to make his life miserable next year.